Alrighty. I know the Lord, I know the Lord, I know the Lord's laid his hands on me. Oh, I know the Lord, I know the Lord, I know the Lord laid his hands on me. It's been some years since we've sung that. We're going to get back to it, and at least next year. So, my siblings in Christ, dear brothers and sisters, Sawubona. Sawubona. Let me tell you about that greeting in the Zulu language, one of the 11 official languages in the Republic of South Africa. Now, just a few days ago, I returned from South Africa with our group of pilgrims. About 3 days ago, I'm still a bit jet-lagged. After this convention, I will sleep. But this is our first diocesan pilgrimage to that incredibly beautiful land. We flew there on United Airlines, a partner of South African Airways, whose flight magazine for travelers is entitled Sawubona. In researching that word several years ago, and I'm looking at Amy and Joe here, Amy Richter and Joe Pagano, were our missionaries to South Africa for a couple of years, coming from St. Anne's Church in Annapolis and appointed by the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, the Episcopal Church, to serve in teaching in theological colleges there. Welcome back. You could, yes. I learned a lot about that word and what it means to be a human being in relation to other human beings. Are you familiar with that greeting, namaste? Namaste. Now, there are parallels between that greeting and the one used in the 2014 blockbuster movie Avatar, which was just recently re-released. How many of you have seen Avatar? Good. Where the people of Navi, the inhabitants of that fictional moon called Pandora, use the greeting Oel Nagati Kame, or I see you. Well, Sawubona is that very common Zulu greeting, which, surprise, surprise, also means I see you. I've been told that most Zulu-speaking South Africans use that word just like most people do in any language when greeting someone. They mistakenly interpret Sawubona. Sawubona, is that more closely, not Sawubona, Sawubona. It means simply hello or hey, and they don't really live into the profoundly significant meaning of I see you. Just as the Navi natives explained in that movie Avatar, I see you doesn't imply simply an ordinary seeing. Instead, like namaste, it means really the holy in me sees the holy in you. Or as we may say in the Christian tradition, the God in me sees the God in you. I now see myself. I see myself because you see me. And so, say it after me, Sawubona, which means I see you. And then, let me get to Njikona. The Zulu greeting Sawubona literally means I see you, and the response Njikona means I am here. As always, when translating from one language to another, crucial subtleties are lost. Inherent in the Zulu greeting and response is the sense that until you saw me, I didn't exist. And by recognizing me, you brought me into existence. A Zulu folk saying clarifies this, umuntu, ngubuntu, nagabuntu, meaning a person is a person because of other people. More on that later. Now, this is a hard concept for most of us raised in the modern global North and West to get our heads around. We need a shift in our thinking of what makes a human being human, shifting from an individually centered culture to a more communally centered culture. What Saul Bona encourages you to do the next time when you meet and greet someone is to greet them wholeheartedly, taking a moment of reflection and actually see the person you're greeting, to see them beyond the physical. By truly seeing them, you are bestowing one of the greatest honors upon another human being. You are shedding light upon them, a spiritual light that energizes and empowers them. We Christians recognize this as the light of God that brings them into life. The one who is greeted exists. Sawabona. Sawabona. So I'll say Sawabona, and you respond Njikona. Njikona. Meaning, Sawabona. I see you. I am here. I see wonderful things in this diocese. One of the privileges of being Bishop Bob and I, and all bishops will tell you, the funnest part of their jobs is the visitations. And we are able to see the whole in the ways that most of you don't get a chance to do. Have you taken the time to really see each other, both individually and collectively? If your only frame of reference of what it means to be an Episcopalian is to pay attention only to your own particular congregation, to not be concerned about anything but your own church's concerns, and to not care one whit about what it means to be part of a larger body, such as a diocese, which is literally a household of faith, then your own spirituality suffers. I was taught growing up that a lone Christian is no Christian. In a spiritual sense, you and I exist because of each other. The more you live into the diversity that is our diocese, the richer your own spiritual journey is. For those of you who've never considered becoming involved in the larger church as well as your own parish, I encourage you to seek more opportunities to really get to know persons and ministries in this household of faith. When I really see what's going on in the Diocese of Maryland, I want to tell you some of the things I see. In congregational vitality, I see churches like Messiah and St. Matthias in Baltimore, who called a shared rector, Monique Ellison, and continue their work toward a new merged congregation. I see St. Christopher's, Linthicum Heights, and St. John's Lutheran Church. They've begun their work toward becoming the next Lutheran Episcopal Federation, joining with others such as Holy Apostles and St. Stephen's and Catonsville. They've completed their work to become a joint Lutheran Episcopal congregation. And the work to create a new faith community in Urbana. I see Grace Church New Market coming into partnership with Living Grace, the ELCA congregation, the Lutheran congregation, to help get that thing started, a new faith community, hopefully a new church. The Diocese of Maryland is one of 5 dioceses named as participants in the FaithX Sustainability Program. This program, funded by Trinity Wall Street, will make it possible for 7 to 10 of our small congregations over the course of 3 years to develop models of sustainable ministry and mission. What a thing to see. We're one of only 5. In partnership with the Episcopal Housing Corporation, which is a sister ministry to ours, we've entered into a new partnership with a group that does great portfolio analysis of properties. And the diocese will be exploring real estate asset possibilities in 4 to 10 congregations in the next 18 months. Many kudos to our hardworking staff and Margaret Shadow, our property portfolio manager, Mary Sulerud and Christopher Lynn Payne and their teams, and the Diocesan Property Committee in working with our staff on this. In the past year, 8 members of the Congregational Vitality Committee have served as consultants to congregations on a variety of development issues. And we've had over 70 lay and clergy leaders from across the diocese register to attend last month's Fall Vestry Vitality Day, which is entitled, Can These Bones Live? Vital Signs as we emerge from the pandemic. And this hybrid format of using newly installed technology on site at the Diocesan Center has enabled participants to gather in person and virtually to have a powerful experience of learning together. And you've heard earlier that the College for Congregational Development, CCD, just graduated its first class of people who have completed the 2-year program. And the CDC here will be initiating year-round possibilities in 2023, in addition to the summer program. And the cost of the program of doing this has been reduced in half. Your cost will be reduced in half because of funding from the Diocesan Council. It's a way of saying all of us are giving to these initiatives just in congregational development. That's a lot. And I don't know how many of you have seen the whole of what we are seeing. In young adult ministry and youth ministry, good gosh, they've stayed open and active by Zoom during the pandemic. And that's hard to do. It's affected the Sutton Scholars Program and other youth programs to get kids back. And they're looking forward to developing a strong staff of youth leadership for the 2 annual retreats. New Beginnings, number 10 in this diocese for junior high, and Happenings, number 16 for senior high students. They're planning trips and workshops and trainings for youth and adult leaders, such trainings as safe dating workshops, mental health first aid for our teenagers, and inclusion of our LGBTQ kids. In addition to a summer full of camps at Claggett and the planning for the Episcopal Youth Event, the National Youth Event in College Park next year, of which our own Kate Riley, our diocesan canon for youth, she has just been recently named on the planning team for that. Yes, Kate is awesome. And she reminded me this morning when Bishop Bob and I had breakfast with our pages and kids over there in that corner. Thank you so much. Yes. She reminded me that there aren't that many dioceses that have full-time youth missioners. We do in this diocese. We care, and they're doing awesome work. I see a lot of things happening in mission and outreach. There are numerous pantries and feeding programs throughout our diocese, from Christ the King Woodlawn to St. Andrews in Pasadena, Guardian Angel in Baltimore. There are many, many others. There are ministries caring for refugees and immigrants through ERICA, the Episcopal Refugee and Immigrant Center Alliance, a ministry of our cathedral in welcoming refugees, and Gilead House at St. Mark's on the Hill in Pikesville. And there are several parish connections with global partners around the world, including All Hallows Davidsonville, an expanding mission of assisting Syrian refugees and their families in a town, Şanlıurfa, in Turkey, now renamed Turkey in English, about 25 miles from the border. Just notice, these Muslim refugees have lost everything. But they're finding strength and courage halfway around the world from a Christian community, All Hallows in Davidsonville. That's amazing. And then more locally, the St. Luke's Youth Center, SLYC, S-L-Y-C in Baltimore, was one of our recipients in the first round of receiving grants from our reparations fund. And the Sutton Scholars Program continues to positively impact the lives of Baltimore City High School students. Those are just some snapshots in mission and outreach. Archives and history. Our long-serving archivist, Mary Klein, reports that our diocese's archival office has never been so busy, as the number of researchers availing themselves to our immense store of information more than doubled from previous years in this last year. Why? Because of the growing interest among all churches in our state and throughout the Episcopal Church in facing up honestly to our history of slavery and racial discrimination. And it's resulted in an unprecedented surge of interest. We encouraged you last year, as in previous years, research your parish's history. It's part of telling the truth, learning the truth about how you got there, how the building got there, and what's been the truth about the history of relationships. And our archivist will help you. Speaking of Mary Klein, I want to acknowledge also your diocesan staff, working very hard to make all things possible. Will the members of the diocesan staff here present just stand up and give them your hand. I also want to call your attention to this. Larry Mack. Larry Mack died November 6th, last week. He was, along with Bob Jarvis, was the longest serving staff member at the Diocesan Center for over 22 years. He was a custodian, grounds person. That was his title, but let me tell you what he did. His cheerful hello that many of you have experienced, his faithful work in setting up spaces, his passion for Baltimore sports teams, and his sense of humor will be sorely missed. Our building staff gathered a few days ago to pray and share these memories, and a memorial service for Larry will be December 1, 2022. December 1, coming up at 6 p.m. at the Cathedral of the Incarnation. Let's just take a moment and thank God for Larry Mack and commend him to God. Amen. One other word in another African word. When I see you, not only as my beloved brothers and sisters in ministry, but more and more as part of me, then I'm energized. This is the way of Ubuntu. Ubuntu, an African phrase expressing our common humanity, based on the meaning of I and you and me. Ubuntu is simply a worldview. It can be translated as personhood. It is the African perspective on how your self-identity is formed through community. We in the West have been so socialized into thinking that we are self-made, independent persons. And we too frequently dismiss how much we are products of the communities that have formed our opinions and our worldviews and images of how we see ourselves. We tend to think of ourselves as isolated individuals apart from others and frequently in competition with others. Ubuntu, though, is about being deeply connected with others in your community. Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, God rest his soul, this Anglican bishop who was beloved and celebrated worldwide for his leadership, and he came to this diocese months after I was consecrated to help us launch our journey toward reconciliation. How many of you remember him coming here in November? He launched all of this and allowed us to use that phrase, truth and reconciliation, just as they have done in South Africa to repair the damage from years of apartheid by forcing people to face up to the truth, but then reconciling. Well, his leadership, along with Nelson Mandela, their leadership in saving South Africa from its racial madness, he perhaps said it best when he said this. This is a quote from Archbishop Tutu. "Persons with Ubuntu are open and available to others, affirming of others. Do not feel threatened that others are able and good, for they have a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that they belong in a greater whole and are themselves diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed." So, my friends, a person with Ubuntu cannot be comfortable with racism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, or any other ism system of putting people down because they're different from you. Ubuntu guards us against that. And here I'm going to ask for a colleague of ours, Sally Goss. Sally Goss was just elected to the Diocesan Council. And she and her husband Tom, right there, from St. John's, Ellicott City, both of them, they've coordinated the last several diocesan pilgrimages. And she gave a meditation. On our pilgrimages, we have daily meditations. She gave one the other day that I've asked Sally, would she just give to us right now as a part of this address? A personal reflection of hers on truth. Sally?
Thank you, Bishop Sutton. As you said, my husband Tom and I have just returned from the long-awaited pilgrimage of creation, reconciliation, and hope to South Africa with Bishop Sutton leading us. While there, we saw the beauty of our world mixed with some of its ugliness, and yet feelings of hope were present. After we visited such places as Robben Island and District 6 Museum around Cape Town, the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, our group would have opportunities for discussions. At two of those discussions, I heard two people remark that when we talk about truth and reconciliation, we often want to rush to reconciliation and ignore the truth. Well, that got me to thinking about my truth. I shared what I termed my painful truth with the group on our last day for our final devotion. As a bit of background, I grew up near Rocky Mount, North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. And in 1970, when I entered 10th grade, the black students from Booker T. Washington High School came to be a part of the white high school, Rocky Mount Senior High. They were known as the Booker T. Lions, and we were known as the Rocky Mount Blackbirds. In 9th grade, we learned the two schools would merge, and we were given the opportunity to vote for the mascot for the following year. We settled on the Rocky Mount Griffons as a way to create unity between the schools using characteristics of each mascot. Well, I learned on our pilgrimage that Bishop Sutton and I were born the same year. It struck me that we could have been classmates. That had never occurred to me before. And so as I began to think about that, I remembered that I never truly made friends with the black students in my high school. In fact, I was afraid to go to assemblies because I thought there might be race riots similar to the ones I saw on the news in other parts of our state. My mother let me go to school late on those mornings when I felt afraid. There was also a time in my drama class when I was assigned to dance with a black student. He was tall and very dark, not unlike Bishop Sutton. I did not want to be paired with him. I was afraid and embarrassed that I had to dance with him when we gave our performance in the community. Now, I can't imagine today not wanting to know Bishop Eugene or any of my other friends who are African American. I realized that I had missed out on a wonderful opportunity to know and be friends with my black classmates. I thought of the part of our confession where we speak of things left undone. That is one of the things I have left undone. I felt afraid, and probably worse, simply disinterested in knowing who they were. But there's a stark contrast for me, however. I grew up on our family farm where I felt both love both for and from the black families who lived and worked there. As a little girl, I was friends with and played with one of the black girls who lived with her family on our farm. And with the help of my husband, Tom, I have found her recently, and we have since visited with one another, and we keep in touch via text and phone calls. So I asked myself, how could I have loved them so much and felt their loving care of me and be so afraid of my classmates? So there it is, my ugly truth. At one session, Bishop Eugene asked if we were proud of our white skin. I had never thought about it. My skin was just my skin. I've never thought about my skin one way or the other, except that I'd prefer not to have freckles. I was doing some consulting in a West Baltimore elementary school several years back. A little second grade boy, as second graders do, asked what those spots were on my skin and asked if he could touch them. I, of course, said yes. And as he touched them, he asked me if they hurt. And I said no, and he seemed happy about that. So our skin can be seen in many different and confusing ways. Well, when I had this memory of not wanting to dance with my black classmate and the realization that Bishop Sutton and I could have been classmates, I had thought, well, I only want to tell Bishop Eugene about this. And I even asked, before doing so, I even asked Bishop Eugene if telling the truth would be hurtful, and should it be told if it's hurtful. He said sometimes things might be hurtful, but it's important to tell the truth. I tried to find a time to tell him only, and that didn't work out. But it was a question about our white skin that prompted me to want to wait a few days and tell my story to the whole group when it was my turn to lead the daily devotion. I was glad that I waited to tell it on the bus as we were on our way to the Cradle of Humankind Museum. In one of our sessions after we had visited the Apartheid Museum, Bishop Sutton asked for thoughts about what we had seen. My response was a question. What would I have done during apartheid if I had lived there at that time? And I had hoped that I would oppose it, but I think based on how I responded during my high school years, back then, I might have done nothing. But I like to hope that being the person that I am today, that I would have been opposed to apartheid in South Africa and done something. The opportunity for reflection during this pilgrimage of creation, reconciliation, and hope has helped me to identify my truth and to share it with my fellow pilgrims and now with you. For that, I am very grateful.
This is Ubuntu, and this is what Sawabona and Ijikona means. It means connecting with people on deeper levels. And that interpersonal connection has to show forth too in what we do as a body, to reconcile. We are reconciled to God, and we celebrate that reconciliation every week in worship. But how can we be reconciled to each other? I want to end this by showing a video. This 17-minute video was shown at the House of Bishops at General Convention, but it was not shown in the House of Deputies. And most of you have not seen this video that was produced by our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Let's see it now.
Hi, I'm the Reverend Joe Zollicoffer. I'm the rector here at Holy Trinity Episcopal Church in Churchville, Maryland. And when I was called to this parish in 2019, I learned of a program that this church was doing to uncover their history, and in particular, Rose Kane and her story. It appears that Rose was a domestic servant of the Cole family, a family local to this area. And when she passed away in 1951, the rector here, my predecessor, was a segregationalist. And he decided that she should not be buried in the church cemetery proper, that she should be outside the bounds of the cemetery. So that's where she was buried, and in fact there was a fence placed there to have a physical barrier between her and this parish. So when I learned of that story, I was enthusiastic that we should include Rose and her story in placing her back where she belongs as part of this family of Holy Trinity, as officially being within the bounds of the cemetery, of righting that wrong. That is exciting for me as a priest in the Episcopal Church, that we are willing to do this work. There are sins that our churches have done that we must repent and seek repentance and seek restoration and reconciliation. And I'm excited that we are doing that not only in our diocese, but as a people.
I'm going to read a resolution from Convention of the Diocese of Maryland in 2007 on the apology for slavery. Resolved that the 223rd Convention of the Diocese of Maryland, meeting May 4th and 5th, 2007, apologizes for the role of the Anglican Church in colonial America and of the Episcopal Church in the state of Maryland in the slavery of African Americans and in the subsequent racial injustice.
We began before most dioceses. We began immediately at our diocesan convention. We set up a committee to study this, to begin dialogues within the diocese about our racial history.
We had an anti-racism committee, and we had our reparations commissions as well. When I came, I combined them both because they are related, and it's hard to have one group of people doing anti-racism work and another talking about reparations. And so we combined the two committees and we called them the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Here's the significance of the name. Most people, all but a few people, really want reconciliation. The problem is that most people don't want to do the work. And that work of reconciliation begins in speaking the truth, telling the truth, finding out about the truth, exploring the truth, researching the truth. But you can't get to reconciliation until you first know what the truth of your history has been.
Truth is at the very heart of Christian faith. Without truth, we really can't move forward. And so our lives should be trying to discover the truth instead of trying to bury it.
In this diocese, what we began was the Trail of Souls pilgrimages.
The idea for the Trail of Souls came up, which I thought, wow, this is like really great.
November 1, 2015, we had a caravan of buses.
We started here at the cathedral and talked about some of the history and things that happened there.
We went to Southern Maryland, other places, to have people tell their stories. What did you find about your church's history?
We were lucky that the persons at the church who worked on the history were excited, some reluctant, but once they started working on their history, then it was like very real for them, and they just went at it, so that was good.
The archives was one place that was used because we have records here that can certainly aid in that discovery. I saw people who, even when they were reading the information, say, that can't be true. In 1840, when Bishop Whittingham became diocesan, he sent out a survey to every parish in the diocese with 4 pages of questions. And one of the questions was, do you do anything specific for the servants in your congregation? Which he always used that euphemism. He never used the word slave. Where do they sit in church? Do you have a gallery? Do you catechize the children? One parish had sent 3 researchers to look into their past, and they were looking at that document, and the priest had answered, we have a gallery for the servants. And she just said, that's not right. It wasn't used for slaves. It was used, they brought prisoners from the county jail. So she never did buy into that truth, even though it was written right there in black and white.
I think it's been very helpful to go to places like All Saints Church in Sunderland, where the balcony is so high that if you sit down, you cannot see and you cannot see over. It clearly was a slave balcony, and it's on 3 sides of the church.
The slave galleries themselves, and they are a prominent feature when you come in, and you're tempted to call them balconies, but they were the galleries, and their intent was to hold the slaves. Also, freemen were there, non-landed whites, and members of the indigenous population. But primarily it was slaves that were escorted there.
They were herded up a very narrow staircase in the front of the church, so their masters could be sure that they were actually going up there and not coming down again, because the stairwell can be seen from the nave of the church. So they were stuck up there to experience Episcopal worship without being able to see it. They could hear it. So even in church, they were slaves.
And the tobacco leaf essentially was the currency here. If you look at our seating chart from 1774, everyone who lived in the parish, all of the landowners, had to pay each year a 40-pound tax. 40 pounds of tobacco were paid to the parish. And additionally, the choice seats in this place were auctioned off. And again, that was in tobacco.
Clergy were paid by tobacco. Most parishes owned a glebe, which is a piece of land in which they could grow tobacco. And the money from it would pay the clergyman, upkeep the building. The parishes in this diocese, which were formed before the Civil War, every one of them benefited from slavery.
The economy in Western Maryland was different from the Southern Maryland economy that was very dependent on enslaved labor. The industrial slavery that existed is different from the slavery of Southern Maryland, but it's very much a part of the history here. The African American Cemetery at Catoctin, based on our research, contains the remains of people, all of whom were enslaved. Here at the Museum of the Ironworker, we realized that the visitor would perhaps sort of understand more of the humanity of the enslaved through the art and science of forensic facial reconstructions. So we got a grant, and we chose a 35-year-old mother and a 15-year-old young man. When visitors come, they don't just hear about industrial slavery or hear about individuals or read their names, but they're able to actually look into their eyes and see, see the people, see the enslaved who were here at Catoctin.
I had nothing to do with slavery, you hear that? My people didn't enslave anybody. I didn't cause this mess. And you know what? You're exactly right. You didn't cause it. I didn't cause it either. Our generation did not cause the mess we're in, but we're all in the same boat now. The thing is, it's not about guilt, it's about responsibility. What can we, all of us, white and black, descendants of slave owners and descendants of enslaved persons, whether you're a recent immigrant or been here for generations, we're all swimming in this ocean of racism with a debt on the table.
Reverend Natalie Conway is the deacon at the Memorial Episcopal Church in Bolton Hill. But on this day, she recounted finding out that her great-great-grandmother, Harriet Cromwell, was enslaved here at the Hampton National Historic Site, formerly Hampton Plantation in Towson, off of Delaney Valley Road.
It was a shock, because even though you deal with slavery and you deal with subtle racism, to have it actually slap you in the face is a whole nother story. And just trying to deal with that, knowing that somebody a couple of generations ago was actually here and slaving in some capacity with no freedoms, was sad.
My congregation, Memorial Episcopal Church in Baltimore, there were two big plaques in the back, and one of them was in honor of the founding rector, Charles Ridgely Howard. And I had looked at that plaque a million times and knew that I was somehow connected, but never really looked closely into exactly how. And then when Natalie told her story about her family having been enslaved at the Hampton Plantation, I had to say, you know, I'm connected to the other side of that story. It really felt like humanizing the issue for the first time. I think a lot of white people, myself included, always thought of slavery as done, history book is closed, don't reopen it. To the people who say now is not a good time to talk about racism, I agree with you. The right time to talk about racism and slavery was 1619. And every year for the next 403 years, it's gotten to be a worse time to talk about it.
I really felt that really needed some healing. I had consulted someone about doing this libation service.
Natalie had already pretty much organized the trip to Hampton Plantation, and the ability for Natalie and I to pour water on that ground together made an enormous difference and was an enormous change.
And it was also not only a healing, I think, for us, but it was a healing for the 50 people that were with us.
We know that there's a benefit from having white skin. No need to feel sorry about that. I want everybody to feel good about their skin. I want white people to feel good about being white. I want black and brown people to feel good about being black and brown. Let's all feel good about that. But there's a benefit that comes from white skin, and that has to be acknowledged. Denial of it is just another denial from hundreds of years of denials. So if this is not the time because, we got a pandemic, we got other things going on, okay, you tell me, when is the best time for justice?
It only takes one person to be the spur to do this. One person who is determined to dig out the truth and look at it squarely in the face in each parish can make a huge difference. In all the parishes that I have been to, that I've helped, every one of them presented programs on what they have found. They have owned the past.
You know, it's not something to be swept under the rug. It's something to be examined. It's something to be looked at, to say to each other, I understand now.
We want to be real, you know. We want to be real to ourselves and real to others. We have cornered ourselves, and surrounded ourselves with right liturgy and good doctrine and sound theology. Well, the rest of the world doesn't care. What they're looking for are real people to join them in a real struggle, to find real solutions, and to really create the kingdom of God.
I'm also hoping more and more that when people encounter the phrase, Episcopal Church, I want the first thing they think about is this: wow, there's a community of love. Those are people who put their money where their mouth is. They're talking about race, and that's not tearing them apart. I want people to say, man, the Episcopal Church, what a diverse group of people who really love one another. But more than that, they love people who are not Episcopalians, and they're always reaching out, seeing what they can do to spread the love of God everywhere, spiritually and materially. That would be my hope. And then the next annual convention, we voted on the sum of establishing a seed fund of $1 million. It's more than that now, not because of the stock market, as we all know, but because of continuing contributions to that fund of people from all over the state, Episcopalian or non-Episcopalian, saying, we want to be a part of this. So my friends, this is Ubuntu. And it flows from greeting one another, seeing the God in that person, connecting with God who is in you, and we become that community of love. So abona, injacona. God bless you all. May God bless the Episcopal Church, and may God bless the Diocese of Maryland. Amen. Thank you.